one of the things that we're going to talk about today is something that I call corporate welfare. We all know about welfare programs for people and how destructive those are to character and also, of course, to taxpayers' wallets and ability for other people to pay for things because you're paying for other people to pay for things. But what a lot of people don't seem to realize is that the government also gives out a lot of money to corporations, to businesses, to different kinds of industries. So they're taking essentially your money and providing different businesses or different industries with certain types of benefits that give them a benefit for, for a number of different reasons. And one of the things that we see, and it's not just in Wyoming, but it's in every single state, and it also, of course, is federally, and you see this all over the world as well, is where you've got these politicians who are saying, look, what we really want to do is A, diversify the economy, or B, create jobs. And what they're really talking about is corporate welfare, and that's the provision of a specific benefit to a certain business or industry. We see it all the time. So one of the things that is really a problem about this is that this is not really the role of government. When we talk about the Game and Fish Department, we talk about the mandate creep of that particular department, but corporate welfare, what that really represents is a mandate creep of the entire government. Because the role of government, the fundamental role of government is to protect individual rights, including property rights, not to provide subsidies to business. This takes us a long ways away from what government is really supposed to be about.
Let's define something also when we come to subsidies, because a lot of times I hear people on the federal level say, well, we subsidize oil and gas. And my answer is no, they get a tax break. They have to earn the money, then they get a tax break because they did things like repair equipment, buy new equipment. There's a difference between that tax break and taking money from taxpayers and giving it to a company, which are usually cronies. In that case, you're dealing with a actual subsidy.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Letting people keep their own money is not subsidizing people. No. And the left is really, really good at manipulating the definitions of things and changing the definitions of things. And that's, I think, part of the underlying problem and the reason that things are getting progressively worse and worse here in this country, and really all over the world as well.
All right, so one of the reasons I brought local into this is because I even see this happening at the city level as well. But let's, for a moment, talk about the state of Wyoming. Again, relatively small state and very conservative by comparison to other states. And yet still, though, there seems to be that corporate welfare and cronyism that creeps into a state that's this size.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And what we're going to talk a little bit about today is one of the sort of more recent manifestations of corporate welfare, and that's this whole data center thing. A lot of people think, well, because what they hear from the governor, from politicians, and from these quasi-government organizations and these other government minions, like I like to call them, is just how great this having all these data centers here in the state is really going to be. But if we really take a closer look, we'll see what these politicians are actually doing is spending all their time talking about how great it is, but what they're not talking about is the actual downsides. Now, just to take a step back for a minute, when I talk about some of these quasi-government organizations, one of the key players in the corporate welfare game is the Wyoming Business Council. Now, and I took a look at the Wyoming Business Council budget, and I was shocked. And when it comes to government, I'm not usually shocked, but I was actually quite shocked about this because in the 2013-14 biennium, they had a budget of $85 million. Okay. About 75% of that went to subsidies for businesses, either directly or kind of indirectly. I mean, it's actually a very, very obscure process that they use. Because we'll talk about this in a minute. It's actually against the Wyoming Constitution for the state to be giving money to people, corporations, or communities that aren't under direct control of the state. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into our ominous parallel discussion. But the thing is that in the 2015-2016 budget, the Business Council is actually going to give away their budget is $102 million. That's a 20% increase in the amount of money it's going to be spending not only on its own staff, which is a shocking 50 people. They've got 50 full-time employees in this department whose function is to give your money away to businesses. I mean, it must be a really hard job giving all that money away.
Oh, sure. If it's somebody else's. Now, of course, if you ask them to reach into their own pocket, it gets a little bit more difficult. But Maureen, hear the sarcasm there? But Maureen, this creates jobs and diversity in our economy.
Whenever politicians start talking about economic diversity and job creation, grab your wallet and run for the hills, because that is just code for corporate welfare. And if you take a look at this data center, this is, I mean, the governor's press release, right in the governor's press release, it says these data centers are going to bring high-paying technology jobs to the state. And of course, they'll diversify the economy. But how many jobs are we actually talking about here? Well, when we start actually adding it up, it's really quite underwhelming, because data centers don't employ a lot of people. You remember what a data center actually is? It's sort of what you call like a server farm, because we've all got our iPods, we've got all of our wireless stuff, everything is, a lot of stuff is up on the cloud right now, but it's not in the cloud in the space, it's actually in a data center, and a bunch of them are actually here in Wyoming. Now, the Microsoft data center got this, there was a big hoo-ha about it. They came to the state, and so back in 2012, the governor announced they were going to be investing about, I think it was $112 million in the state in this data center, and that's actually just outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming here. Well, they've announced 2 more expansions since then. Now, the first 2 expansions, the third expansion was very recent, so a lot of the money they got, all the money they've gotten so far, has been for the first 2 expansions. The first expansion will employ 18 people.
Okay, how much is that per job considering?
I'm getting there. Getting there. The second expansion, which is they're plowing around in the dirt right now. I did a bike by the other day of the facility. It's not too far from here. The next expansion, which is an additional $66 million in investment, will employ 9 people. Okay, so that's 27 jobs.
Right.
27 jobs. Now, how much is that actually going to cost taxpayers? Well, this took, and I think I've got all of the subsidy programs that they're benefiting from, but there could be more that I haven't found out about. So if any listeners haven't, they know of something that I haven't been able to, that I haven't discussed here, they should be sure to give us a call, send us an email, maureen.bader@yliberty.org, and you can also maybe make a comment on one of my blogs, in particular this blog on the slush funds / subsidies on data centers. Okay, so Microsoft received a $5 million managed data center cost reduction grant. In plain language, that means they got a subsidy to help pay for their electricity and broadband costs. Must be nice. They also got a $5 million Governor's Data Center Recruitment Fund handout, and that's money that they can use to prepare the site. So, you see all these graders and diggers and all these technical terms that I'm using for construction. They're out there digging around in the dirt, and they're preparing the sites. They got $5 million for that.
Right.
Then they got another $2.25 million to do more of this managed data center cost reduction, so more money to subsidize their electricity and broadband costs. So from the state alone, they got $12.25 million. The city of Cheyenne then tossed in an extra $1.5 million so that they could build this. It's like a sort of a biofuels type center out to I think it's in the east of town here. So in other words, they got $13.75 million for 27 jobs. That is $509,000 per job. What a deal.
Oh, yeah. Okay, now, the money came specifically from where? The people of Wyoming? Is there federal money involved here?
This is all state money, as far as I can tell. Whether they got more federal money, I'm not sure whether they got any federal money or not. I was just looking at the state money. But, of course, that's not all that they got. Because when we talked about corporate welfare, remember, it was any kind of benefit that the government gives to an industry. So what the other thing they got was 50 acres of free land. So when I talked about that land where I went cycling around to see where they were digging around, they got 50 free acres. Now they got that land from an organization called LEADS, and that's LEADS, not LEEDS, which is this sort of bogus construction thing. You know, if you build green according to LEED standards, well, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something else. Now, the LEEDs is an organization here in Cheyenne that's a membership organization, but they do get some money from the state. So they have donation drives, and they get their membership dues. They buy land, and they try to attract new businesses into the area. So it's economic development, right? So that you know, you'll have more people buying in the stores of these members of this LEEDs group. But the thing is, we're talking about 27 people here. You know, it makes no sense. So they gave away 50 acres. They had an option. Microsoft had an option on another 30 acres, which they actually had to pay for. It was a few $1,000,000, according to the LEEDs CEO that I spoke to. You know, there's really no way for us to really know how much that actually was in terms of monetary value to Microsoft, because LEEDs doesn't price things out by the market. It prices it sort of determines that this is worth it, given how many jobs and how much investment the company is actually going to be making. So, and I mean, the investment is not chump change. At the end of the third investment announcement, we're talking about $450 million in investment. But you know what? The state is not going to benefit from that, because not only did they get all of these direct handouts and free land, they also got an exemption on qualifying equipment for the sales tax. So they didn't pay 100% of the sales tax that they owed, like you and I have to. No, they got an exemption. How much was that worth? Well, between January 2010 and June 2013, the state actually sacrificed $3.4 million in sales tax revenue. Now, that's to all the data centers. Microsoft isn't the only data center. There are a bunch more around. And these data centers, these what they call qualifying data centers, according to the Wyoming Business Council, have about 45 full-time employees. So if you look at that 3.4 million by those 45 full-time employees, that's another $75,555 per job for those over 3 years. But they got another break too. It just goes on and on. They also got a data center permit exemption. So what that does, and you have to listen carefully to the numbers here, because this is where our ominous parallel story starts. The data center that invests more than $178.3 million doesn't have to bother applying for an industrial siting permit. So they essentially save about $500,000. So these big organizations that invest at least $178.3 million don't have to bother, you know, with public meetings and economic analysis and permit hearings and all these sort of really irritating things. Well, the first two investments that Microsoft made here in the Cheyenne area equaled, wait for it, $178.5 million. What a coincidence!
Yeah.
You know?
All right.
And, I mean, the crazy thing about this is exactly like what happened just in the last legislative session with Cody Labs. Now, I don't know if you remember, but there was a bill that was originally called Appropriations to the Wyoming Business Council. What a surprise there. That would eventually had to be changed and completely modified because it actually violated the Wyoming Constitution. So what Senator Hank Coe from the Cody area, he stood up and he basically said, look, you know, I really would like to fund a project up in my community in Park County called Cody Labs. And he stood up. He wasn't even embarrassed. He said, I want taxpayers to pay for jobs in my district. Yeah. There were other senators who said...
Doesn't surprise me that it was him, is what I'm going to say. I've seen this from him before. But anyway, go on.
So, but there were other senators who stood up, like Senator Cale Case, and said, well, you know what? That actually violates the Wyoming Constitution, because Article 3, Section 36 of the Wyoming Constitution says it actually prohibits appropriations to any person, corporation, or community not under the absolute control of the state. So, I mean, essentially, what's happening here is that we've got legislators who are actively violating the Wyoming Constitution and then trying to cover it up by changing these legislatures. But then the thing is, they pass through the legislature anyway. So what we need to start doing is really questioning our legislators. I mean, there's an election coming up. People need to ask their legislators, why do you continue to support corporate welfare when we've got, you know, I mean, we might have low unemployment here at the moment, but really there's still a lot of people having trouble making ends meet. Why are we handing out subsidies to them?
So is Cheyenne just picking winners and losers here?
Yeah, absolutely. That's essentially what corporate welfare is all about. These politicians think they know better than the free market. They try to pick winners, but what we see over and over again is that they're bad at picking winners, but losers like Enron, Solyndra are really good at picking governments.
Okay, now here's my softball question for you. This ought to be pretty easy. So, a lot of these companies are coming into the state of of Wyoming because of the cool weather that we have out here. So, Maureen, with all of this nice, cool weather, if we don't do this, wouldn't they just go to other states?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is a death spiral. You've got all these states; they're all competing to try to get these different businesses to come to their own states. But I mean, where does it end? You see this with the film subsidies, and what happens then is these. I mean, you read these corporate reports, and they say, well, such and such a state had the best incentives for us to go there. I mean, these what the corporations start to do, because these are profit-making organizations, and I'm not saying profit is bad. Profit is great, but they're starting to play one state or one government off against another. And this is, if you actually read, you probably shouldn't get into this right now, but if you read Leonard Peikoff's book Ominous Parallels, what you will actually see is what he discusses there is how Nazism rose up in Germany and the ominous parallels to what's going on in the U.S. when he published this back in 1981 or 1980, but right before the Reagan Revolution, essentially. But what he was looking at is the same move to totalitarianism as happened in Nazi Germany, because what you had with Hitler is him essentially getting businesses on board. So it's a fascism essentially, and is like corporatism, because what you have is private property in name only, but what you've got is the government controlling what these private organizations do. So businesses can sometimes be their own worst enemies. When you start playing with these governments who are becoming more and more totalitarian, at the end of the day, the loser is going to be the business, because remember, the government is the one that has all the guns, except for a few people here in the U.S., right?
Right, yeah. Well, and let's take a look at something else. If it's going to cost us this much money to bring these companies in, then why not just let them go to another state?
Well, that's absolutely right. That's what we need to do. But the politicians need to know that voters understand that this is a losing game. We're going to lose out, because it's not just that we're spending a lot of money to bring these businesses here, and of course that's cost taxpayers, but you're also creating competition for unsubsidized businesses. So if over time you can see what happens is that you have fewer and fewer unsubsidized businesses, more and more subsidized businesses. Where is the money going to come from to pay for these subsidies? Because I think another thing that a lot of people seem to forget is the only money that the government has is money that is taken from your pocket. If you don't have any money in your pocket anymore, there's no more money for them to give away, and then what happens? And that's why I'm saying, if this doesn't stop, it's a death spiral that'll continue.
Well, then get back to the original question that came in from the listener online, which would be, then aren't we picking winners and losers? Because the only way you're going to get a deal like this is if you're a government-approved business.
Yes, that's also true. You need to be somebody like Microsoft or like these data centers, or something that's sort of faddish and popular at the time, like wind turbines. I mean, the green corporate welfare, and we can talk about this another time, is a really good example of the latest fad in spending and how much money it's wasted. I mentioned Enron and Solyndra before. Those are examples of green corporate welfare. That's essentially what the data center is. At the end of the day, it's the same kind of thing.
Thank you, Maureen, for coming on. And, of course, I have your article on my website if people want to pick it up. And your website is?
wyliberty.org.
All right. Good to see you again, Maureen.
You too.